Welcome to Conversations with Educators, where we bring educators from across the country to talk about topics like college and career readiness, graduation tracking, teacher growth, assessment coordination, and more. Let's get started.
Well, good morning. I apologize. We had a couple of technical difficulties getting things set up. So we are so glad that you're here and appreciate you taking the time to meet with us today to continue our conversation. Brian Johnson is here from the Danielson Group, and we're really excited. Brian, thank you so much for sharing again today some of your insight and helping us with our instructional practice and the growth that we want to see in all educators. So we thank you for taking the time, and we're going to just dive in with the first question, if that works for you, Brian.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So what our conversation with educators, again, we're excited to be sharing with you. And so we're going to start off with what does excellence mean to the framework of teaching, Brian? Let's talk a little bit about that whole term excellence. We hear it a lot tossed around in the education world, but in your mind, what does excellence really entail?
Yeah. The word excellence can sometimes be a misnomer. And the work that my team is involved in and how we actually think of the word excellence. We've been doing, school walkthroughs and calibrations for many years. And, the Danielson Framework is often used as an evaluation system and also in coaching and support. So oftentimes when schools are using it for more strictly evaluation, we always hear teachers to say, I'm a distinguished teacher or I'm an excellent teacher. And that pause gives me a little bit of pause, actually, because what that means is, it may be unintentionally, that they've reached a certain destination in their practice, versus we should always be thinking about how are we growing, learning, amending, changing based off our students. So yes, we can become an expert in our instruction, an expert in our curriculum, but I don't believe in the word I'm distinguished. Yes, you have experience. So for me, when I think about what excellence really means, it's a continuous practice. It's always thinking about reflection. It's making sure that I'm making principled decision making based off the needs of my students at all times. It's a mindset more so than it is, I've checked off these things on a checklist, or I have X amount of years in the classroom. I think the excellence can be exhibited from a brand new teacher, because it's all about how they're thinking about being inquisitive and having an inquiry mindset, that no matter where we're talking about classroom environment or we're talking about the instruction, they always are thinking about new and innovative ways. So that's, to me, the what excellence really means in our field.
Yeah, I think sometimes, we use the rubrics, right? And there's that rating scale that sometimes can be the misnomer in that I've arrived. I'm highly effective. Well, I received that highly effective rating, but what else can I do to better connect with my students and to move my practice forward? So I think sometimes those rankings and labels can be um, used in a way of, yes, you're a highly effective teacher in this one area, but how can we help you grow in other areas as well?
And
So
I would piggyback on that and to say, not in just one area, but at one snapshot of time.
yes,
So in observation is only a certain amount of discrete amount of time.
right.
So when we think about excellence or the preponderance of what excellence looks like, I feel like teaching is such a human endeavor that even the most principled or expert teacher will have a bad day or a lesson that doesn't go well. And I think what we have to do in our field is we have to be um, more give more empathy toward those moments, and hopefully those moments are minimized, and there are more moments where we know that students are engaged and learning. But there's also sort of this beautiful thing of, let's talk about why that didn't go as well as you thought it was going to go, or now tomorrow, what's the new thing that you will try since yesterday it didn't work. And those are the conversations that I think are so fruitful, and we should remove fear from them, because
Oh,
oftentimes too, I think teachers feel like, wow, I'm only going to get observed twice a year or 3 times a year, and this is my only one time to showcase what I can do. Versus if we could have an environment where observers and principals and coaches could do more informal and have these conversations so that it doesn't become fear-based when we are talking about improvement and growth.
Brian, I
yeah.
was actually gonna jump in off of that too and say that one observation, that one classroom, that one moment in time, and as a former principal, to really stress to my teachers, you know, the goal, obviously, we are humans. We do want that one observation, that one moment in time to be excellent and to be as high as we can do. But we have to remember that we are growing every day. And if we meet it on that one mark, what do our other, in Texas, there's 180 days. What do the other 179 look like? Because like you said, we are human and we don't always meet that mark, but there is truth to being excellent when you don't meet the mark and you make the changes and you then come back the next day with something a little different, or you've learned so that way when it happens again, you can immediately make the change on the spot, switch it up to get where you need to be. So great. We're on the same page today.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's that moving beyond the dog and pony show, as we used to call it, for the observation, to a growth mindset of continually working on practice. So thank you both for your insight on that. Okay, our second question is, how can teachers foster a culture of learning in the classroom? So what are some strategies? I know 2B in the Danielson framework addresses that. So let's talk a little bit about how we can help teachers build that culture of learning.
Sure. So 2B is our fostering a culture for learning. And what we have are what we call elements of success. So I'll walk through a few of those. So the first is purpose and motivation. And I think what is critical in the classroom is we have to front load and make sure that our students know the importance of the content, how the content relates to the unit, how it relates to their world, how it relates to what they'll learn in the future. And also the motivating factor of making it exciting, making sure that our students understand that there are going to be some monotonous tasks that happen, but it is a part of a larger outcome of why we might be doing a certain activity or a task. So that's the first one. I think the second one is the disposition for learning. And this kind of goes back into encouraging students to be the scientist, the mathematician, the dancer. So when we think about when students are learning, let's say nonfiction, that they're not just learning nonfiction to learn facts, but they're learning almost real time in those learning environments what it means to be an investigator, what it means to actually break down a math problem or something that's complex that we often do in our own real lives and in our professional work. And making it joyful, making it fun, and making it factual. Then the third is student agency and pride in work. And I love when I get to
That's a
see,
biggie.
it's a huge one. I
Yeah.
love when I get to walk into a classroom and a teacher pauses the lesson because they're showing an exemplar of what a student has just produced. Or they're like, this is it. This is where we're going. This is kind of the artifact of what I want to see us, exhibiting in the classroom. Um, we always used to call it the mid-lesson breakdown. One, it's going to affirm students to keep going. Two, it affirms the student who has, the correct work or work that we want to highlight. And it also encourages students to keep going. And the third is just around support. So
Mhm.
how are we building in supports, whether that is a resource center of, calculators and rulers or markers, or they have a certain area where they know that they can get a copy of a processing chart that was on the board, but the accessibility is critical again in ensuring that students can have some type of onus as well on their learning, so that it's not just dependent on the teacher to tell them what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. So those are some of the things I would highlight around 2B.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that support comes. I always love to go and visit classrooms where they're working in tandem with other students. So that peer support is so powerful as they develop their own student agency and really own their learning. Um, I love to see, where they're tracking their goals and this is where I'm working on and this is what I'm struggling with. And again, that transparency and that growth mindset, even with the students in the classroom are beneficial. Amy, what are your thoughts?
I definitely agree. Kind of the working together and that growth mindset, the tracking. I had some fabulous teachers that would take a piece of their, their journal or folder, whatever they use, and have that to let the kids kind of track where they were working and to see it as a sense of pride. We like to talk in terms of numbers sometimes with kids to help kind of take away some of that. Well, I made a 20 or I made a 30, but instead of really starting to just kind of talk through, I had 6. Excuse me, my goal was 7 and I got 6, and not knowing again what that end number was, but to really just focus on the growing and the learning to let them really kind of take ownership in that, and really have that sense of purpose of this is my own. As a teacher, I was very fortunate to teach outside of a major university here in Texas. And so it was really easy to bring in real world examples from the different, professions and jobs that the university was providing. And so I could very easily, quickly on my feet, and I was a science teacher working at a major, outside of a major vet university. So there was a lot of science that kind of worked in with me, but being able to kind of provide that real world and then even connect it to my own life and what my own husband did and how we worked and how it just impacted. And then that kid sharing and what do their parents do and how to really drive in, especially some of those concepts that students don't really feel like they need to know. Just really putting that sense of learning in general. It's not necessarily about the the X, the Y, and the Z. It's you're learning to learn in general.
And that really goes back to the disposition for learning. Um, especially as we want to encourage all of our students to become lifelong learners, that it isn't just about, passing the math test or the ELA test or the state test or,
Right.
just graduating, but it's a life skill of being able to critically think, to analyze, to discuss, to, all the ways that we think about how we apply questioning and discussion in life. And those are what, to me, makes a really well-rounded person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's taking what we use, reflective practice with teachers and shifting that into reflective practice with students too for learning. How often do we have our students reflect on what was challenging for me? What did I have to overcome to enable to learn this? And what level of supports do I need? And so I think that reflection, very often we don't focus a lot of time because we're trying to cover content on that in the classroom. So definitely a culture of learning would have all of these elements involved in it. So Brian, what do you see? Is there an element of success that you think is more challenging to achieve, and why?
Mhm. And I always try to lean in on positivity, but I will say that in my experience observing, hundreds of classrooms, the purpose and motivation is one that I didn't think would be as challenging as it is when I see it. And there's a lot of things that contribute to that. I think one, I was the type of educator that loved teaching. I loved being in the classroom. I loved being with my students. I'm not sure if we have every adult that is in a school building that loves teaching. And maybe that is because there are, again, factors beyond their own
Mhm.
selves that are impacting that. But that's a real conversation that as a school leader or a district person, we have to, again, similarly, what we want to do in the classroom, we want to do in our school building. So, how are we improving or sustaining happiness, joy, well being so that teachers can show up and be their full selves? I often tell people, um, adults, we tend to bring, remove the joy out of the curriculum oftentimes, and then you get students with like glazed over eyes. They are starting to, their posturing is starting to change. And I always, question, in like a debrief with educators where I've experienced this lack of purpose and lack of motivation of, would you want to sit in the student seat and receive the same information? And they're like, no. So, I think there's this relevancy of we should always just think about what is the experience that our students are having in the seats, and
Mhm.
what would be the experience that we would want to have as an adult learner, or if we were a child in your classroom. Like, to me, that is almost the greatest essential question you can ask a teacher for them to start, again, going back to this reflection piece of, oh, wait a minute, I wasn't engaging. I didn't elicit student um, prior knowledge, or maybe they do know more about this topic than I think they do. And so I think that is one that I think is the most challenging, because it's hard. Teaching is incredibly difficult. So it's easy to say that on the outside of like everyone should love teaching, but we should all love teaching if we're in the profession.
Yeah, I always said, what a miserable job teaching would be if you didn't like kids and didn't enjoy what you were doing. I mean, to be in a room with, students, I just think that would be a misery if you really weren't passionate about kids. So I agree, because when I was thinking about this question myself, I thought, well, probably purpose and motivation would be the challenging. We've got kids that are used to the entertainment and the screen time and all that. So how do you bring not the same, we want to entertain them, but how do you bring that relevance? Because what you see is when it's relevant and the teacher's passionate, the kids are going to engage because they see the excitement that the teacher has. And I know you can't do that every day. And there are some things that it's like, okay, we need to learn this because it's going to lead us to this next step that is really exciting. And so I think sometimes um, again, going back to that student agency, we aren't transparent in the purpose of why we're learning this and then creating that motivation. So I think that would be the one I chose too.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, Amy, did you want to add anything?
I think you two said it beautifully. One of the one caveat that I'd like to add in is really changing helping change the teacher mindset too. Like Brian, you said it great when you said I wasn't engaging. That is difficult for a person who loves to teach and is truly passionate about their job at times to be able to stand up and fully admit. And so you definitely want to create that sense of growth on your campus in your district to really allow teachers that ability to kind of self-reflect and say today was an off day, or in my mind it was going to go better but it didn't, and give them that power to kind of take control, so that they can be, you know, more purposeful and motivating as they move forward. So
Yeah, that's true. Well, we have a little bit of time now for our live Q&A. So if there are any questions, you go ahead and just drop that in the Q&A spot, and we'll be happy to answer those and give you some additional insight. Brian, talk to us a little bit more about the dispositions of learning.
Mm-hmm. So the dispositions of learning are really about how we think about the nature of teaching. And, it's very much connected again to kind of like the purpose and motivation, but the dispositions are really about in a, lesson or even in a curriculum. So what are the finite things that you want students to understand and learn? How are we thinking about speaking, listening, interactions with one another? It's about the more tactical pieces of how do you ensure that students are annotating a text, or in math, how are we making sure that students understand the variable or the process in which they are asked to solve problems? And really, to me, this goes a lot into almost domain one when we think about planning and preparation, that it's the intellectual prep that is required on the teacher's behalf to kind of know the flow of the lesson, to know where there might be some misconceptions, where they may also want to like highlight certain things for students, because they know it's an important, topic, or it's a factoid that they know is going to be universal in that lesson, that unit. So it's much more around the kind of intellectual piece of how we're thinking about the pedagogy, how we are translating that to students.
That's a great explanation. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, and
I have
oh,
a
go ahead. Okay.
question popped in. Can we talk a bit more about creating equitable outcomes for students through our planning? How do we avoid over scaffolding or having students lose motivation? Great question.
That is a great question.
So I think one thing about over scaffolding is that oftentimes I think scaffolds, at least in my experience, have been graphic organizers. It's much more like, do they need the graphic organizer, or did everyone just get it? So I think, to me, a part of how we don't over scaffold, and this is in like meaningful discussions with our students. So if we have an idea of where we want the conversation to go, or, the process in math, that it's almost, you're going to let the students be the voice. And if you see that, oh, they might be steering a little bit too far to the wrong direction, it's the onus of the teacher to rein them back in. So I think our job is less on let me teach the student versus let the students have productive struggle, and I pop in as needed. And I think that really does help. And then I think that goes to the motivation piece.
Mm-hmm.
Students probably would prefer hearing their peers' thoughts,
Yeah.
reactions, than hearing one adult's. So I think creating more, pairs, triads, collaborative work. I think a lot around group projects, giving students opportunities to think about two things. One, there's the academic part of the task, but then there's the social emotional aspect of how do I learn how to work with another person? What is the personality type that is different than mine? Like all those things in combination make a beautiful chemistry that really helps our students in both endeavors.
Yeah. When you said that about the productive struggle, it's always so impressive when the students have that aha moment when they figure it out themselves. And that just increases that motivation and that sense of joy that comes in learning something new and having that productive struggle. So I do think the group work and the, reciprocal teaching and the Socratic circles, and there's so many avenues and instructional methods as you can incorporate that help foster that, and not the overt scaffolding of let me show you all the steps. Yeah.
And I definitely, oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I definitely think there is, or there needs to be time devoted to teachers planning how to do that, through role play, and practicing in a PLC. Because as a teacher who may be used to standing up and giving, to allow those other team members to say, oh, my kids say this, how would you respond? Because you have to be prepared as a teacher to respond to the students, which is a different prep than being able to deliver a lesson. And so I think there definitely needs to be time to plan and role play those types of activities to get teachers more confident and comfortable with kind of turning over those reins. So yes.
And that was exactly what I was going to say next. It's also requires teachers to have time together to engage in the lessons as if they were their own students, to look through their lesson planning, and whether it's independent practice time, wherever it is, that they actually are going through it together and experiencing the math problems or the ELA or science as a group.
Yes, I think that is a perfect segue into closing out our time together. Really appreciate, I know we're coming right up on the end of the session. And I want to thank Brian for his time to spend and share the information. Danielson has a plethora of resources available to help in that instructional model and planning and all of the different domains. We at Education Advance try to make things easier through our products. We have test enablement software. We have a graduation tracking tool, and then we actually house the Danielson rubric in our evaluation tool. So we are more than happy for you to reach out, and if you have any questions or any ways that we can help support you. And again, thank you so much for attending today. We look forward to our session next week, the third in this series. So join us again next Wednesday, and thanks so much for taking the time out today.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. If you want to learn more about college and career readiness, graduation tracking, teacher growth, assessment coordination, be sure to subscribe to our newsletter. Until next time.